I'm really happy to be here with all of you. And I'm going to let Alex get us started, and then I'll offer some comments following that.
Thanks, Michelle. Good morning, everybody. I'm Alex Albanak, the Associate Vice Provost for Research Administration at Johns Hopkins University and co-chair of the Federal Demonstration Partnership. On behalf of my fellow co-chair, Michelle Masucci, Vice President of Research at Temple University, and David Wright, the Executive Director of FDP, welcome to our January 2022 virtual meeting. We're so pleased to see so many people to continue to engage with us in our virtual meeting format. And we do obviously look forward to a day when we can reunite in person. And along those lines, we want to let you know that we've evaluated the timing of returning to in-person since our last meeting. And based on a survey of interest among our members, and then also carefully considering budgetary, logistical, and structural needs, we're pleased to announce that our plan as of now is to work towards an in-person meeting in the fall of 2022. We've also initiated a working group, I think we've mentioned previously, and this working group is examining the future of our meetings. They're evaluating our format, the cadence, the function of the future in-person meetings, both virtual and hybrid. And we hope that you will provide input to that discussion when we reach out to you and ask for your input. In the meantime, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our nearly 650 registrants for this meeting. And just as a reminder, there's still time to register. So if any of your colleagues would like to join, please welcome them to join. I have two personnel announcements to share with you. First, we want to warmly welcome Sarah Piaczek as our new full-time senior program assistant. We're so happy to be in the process of onboarding her, and we look forward to her many contributions to come. And please help us give Sarah a warm welcome to the FDP community throughout this meeting. You'll see her everywhere. On another note, we are sharing with you news that David Wright, our FDP Executive Director for the past 15 years, is stepping down from his position at the end of February. We want to extend a heartfelt thank you to him for his invaluable service to FDP and wish him well on his next endeavors. Michelle, would you like to elaborate?
Of course. First of all, I also want to warmly welcome Sarah to the FDP. We're delighted that she is with us now on a full-time basis and excited for the increased capacity that represents for us to do our important work. I also want to echo Alex's sentiment about David. He has really helped the FDP to grow the scope and reach of our organization and work tirelessly to ensure that we have the resources and capacity to meet the needs of our members, to conduct our demonstration projects and keep our network well connected. It's really been personally gratifying to work with David, and he's a constant source of knowledge and strength for the organization. We will miss him dearly. We are planning a special meeting in advance of his departure to fully recognize and celebrate his accomplishments and thank him for his invaluable service to the FDP. So Alex and I will be sharing more details about that with you in the near future. Please stay tuned as we do that. As we look to the future, we will also be in touch with next steps about the process for finding a new executive director who can build on the successes of David's accomplishment these past 15 years. Before moving on with some program announcemements, I just want to remind everybody that the FDP is an initiative of the Government University Industry Research Roundtable of the National Academies, better known as WEIR, led by Susan Sloan. So we're really happy about the relationship that we have with WEIR. It's one of the distinguishing features of the FDP because it means that our activities are connected to the important convening role that WEIR and the National Academies play in connecting our work to broad discussions with government agencies, advocates for research, and our member institutions. We are really grateful for the ongoing support that we receive from WEIR and the academies, and I just want to acknowledge that and remind everyone of that connection. Today's opening plenary will be a fireside chat with Maria Zuber, co-chair of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. She will be introduced and joined by Richard Sullivan, former co-chair of the FDP, shortly. In addition, we're hosting a coffee hour after that session to offer the opportunity for community networking within the FDP based on some of the topics that you have identified using our online tool for eliciting suggestions and comments called Thought Exchange. It's not too late to register for the coffee hour and join the conversation, where we will have small breakout rooms to foster discussion on the topics that you have all suggested. After that session, we have the Federal Updates Plenary, one of the hallmarks of this organization. And we're delighted to share that at the end of the day, we will have a session dedicated to sharing information about the National Science Foundation's proposed new Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships Directorate. A final program note is that we want to call your attention to a new session that will be held on Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern, related to the January 2022 release of NSPM 33, the Guidance for Implementing National Security Presidential Memorandum 22. The session will, 33. The session will provide an overview of the memo and provide an opportunity for you to give feedback that will then be shared with federal partners to support our future discussions. Throughout the meetings, we hope that you will look for sessions related to your ongoing activities and initiatives that you may be interested in, and we really look forward to your input and feedback on how it's all going. I'm now delighted to turn our attention towards this morning's opening plenary, which will be moderated by Richard Selkman in the format of a fireside chat. As you may know, Dick was Caltech's longstanding Associate Vice President for Research Administration before his recent retirement, and he continues to be one of our most experienced and invaluable voices within the FDP. We have counted on him for his guidance and wisdom for many years, and I'm really excited to introduce my friend and colleague, Dick Sullivan, to begin our session with Dr. Zuber. Dick, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And it's good to still have a close connection to the FDP, an organization that I've been involved in since its very beginning. And one of the hesitations I had in retiring was that I might not get to see any of you anymore. And I'm glad that didn't turn out to be the case. So let me add my welcome to Dr. Maria Zuber. And some of you might be wondering, what is a fireside chat and what does it have to do with the FDP? I could give you the history of fireside chats, but I won't, other than to say that the idea is that we're going to have an informal discussion. There won't be any PowerPoint slides. This is not a formal presentation, but rather we're going to spend the next while talking with and hearing from Dr. Maria Zuber, who, as you just heard, is a member of the President's Council on Science and Technology. We're going to talk about some of the current activities of Pcast and possibly look at some of the areas of overlap between Pcast and what the FDP is about. Then we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers that will be moderated by Michelle and Alex, our current FDP co-chairs. So let me say a word or two about Maria Zuber, and then we'll get started. First of all, in 2020, the other coach are Francis Arnold, professor of chemical engineering at Caltech, and Eric Lander, who is the president's science advisor and also the director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy. I would say that's a pretty powerful troika who are running Pcast. Maria Zuber is a professor of geophysics and also vice president for research at MIT. She received her bachelor's degree from University of Pennsylvania and her master's and doctorate from Brown University. She's a member of the National Academy of Sciences. She has been a member of the National Science Board and served a term as chair of the board. She has a very long and distinguished resume, and we could spend the next few hours going through it, but we won't. There's one item that I want to mention. and that is just a few years ago, Maria served as PI on a NASA mission called GRAIL, Gravity Recovery and Interior Laboratory Mission. The GRAIL mission involved launching two spacecraft that would together orbit around the moon and provide ways of understanding the moon's gravitational fields. Anyone who has been a PI on a project of that magnitude knows the ins and outs of the challenges of managing federally funded research activities and some of the administrative burdens associated with that. And so that makes Maria particularly qualified to be meeting with this group because, after all, our goal in life is to try to reduce administrative burden associated with research. So enough of that. I'm very pleased to welcome Maria Zuber. We're so glad you are able to spend the time with us. So let me start by just asking you to tell us a little bit about what exactly is Pcast. You know, there are lots of Washington entities that have similar names, Pcast, OSTP, NSB, GUIRR. They all seem to be in similar realms, but what is Pcast and how does it differ from some of these other groups?
Okay, all right. Well, Dick, thank you for the invitation, and also to Michelle and Alex and David. Thrilled to be here to talk to all of you today. And you know, I'd like to start out just by expressing my personal thanks and the thanks of Pcast also on all the work that that you professionals do to support what we all try to do in our science. So so thank you very much for everything that you have done, and there's more to be done. So thanks in advance for what you will be doing. So so Pcast, as we said, is the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. Now there are two presidentially appointed science advisory bodies in the federal government. One is Pcast, and the other is the National Science Board. So the National Science Board is presidentially appointed, but once it's appointed, the members are then independent. So the National Science Board can do whatever it's going to do without getting the permission of the White House. Okay, and the National Science Board, their role is to oversee the National Science Foundation. So the members include the director of NSF, and also to act as advisors to the president and the Congress. Okay, so but like I said, after they're appointed, they don't have to get to the permission of the White House or anybody in the executive branch to do what they do. Now, Pcast is appointed by the president and reports directly to the president, has interactions with the president, and advises the president. We're not an advisor to Congress, although Congress can ask us questions, and we would, of course, respond, okay, in some way. Now, Pcast started, well, let's go back and talk about just advising the president. Advising the president on science and technology started back with Franklin Roosevelt in World War II, in the Vannevar Bush days. And that advising was informal. The Endless Frontiers came out of that, which led to the whole way that the US funds research. Then in, I think it was Dwight Eisenhower, formed a formal group called PSAC, which is President Science Advisory Council. And then that evolved to include technology and Pcast under George H.W. Bush when he was president. So, so advising the president has gone on for a long time. So the main way that Pcast does its job is to write reports, and the interesting part about Pcast is that when Pcast writes a report, it goes directly to the president. It doesn't have to go to any federal agency for review or approval. So we will give a report to the president. The president may ask us to work on something. We may recommend something to the president. Would you like us to work on this? If the president says no, we don't do it. But it goes directly to the president, and then the president can decide whether to implement it or not to implement it. So so that's the way that Pcast works. And I should also talk about the Office of Science and Technology Policy. That's part of the executive branch. The director of OSTP, Eric Lander, is also the president's science advisor, which President Biden in this administration elevated to a cabinet position. And the director of OSTP and two external co-chairs constitute the leadership of Pcast.
Well, thank you. That's very helpful. You know, keeping track of the ways in which our government works is really important. And it's helpful to understand, for instance, that Pcast reports directly to the president and doesn't have to go through what can sometimes be quite a maze of interacting with agencies to get their blessings along the way.
Yeah, but I'd like to add, that's a really good point, Dick, and I'd like to add something there. So we're not required to get approval from agencies. However, if Pcast were to make a recommendation to the president that affected what an agency does or the way an agency is doing something, we would certainly want to have that agency in the loop while we were developing recommendations, so that it's a somewhat of a collaborative arrangement. Because if Pcast recommends something and it's just non-implementable for some reason or another, and we didn't take the time to understand that, then that's not a very valuable recommendation to be giving the president. And so I would like to think that when we write our reports and develop our recommendations, that there will have been enough interaction with agencies that the agencies would warmly welcome the recommendation that comes down from the president. Hopefully, we're here to make the government run better for researchers in this country, scientists and technologists, and we know that the people in the agencies want that as well. So this is really a shared vision.
Good. I'm glad you clarified that, and I think that collaboration along the way is absolutely critical. I mean, and that's what people in research do all day long, is collaborate. When the president appointed you and the two other co-chairs of Pcast, he posed 5 questions for your consideration. And I just want to read the 5 questions, and then I'd like to take a closer look at them and see what you have to say. So the 5 questions are: first, what can be learned from the pandemic? Second, what can be done about climate change? Third, how can the US lead the world in the development of new technologies and industries? Fourth, how can we guarantee that the fruits of science and innovation will benefit all Americans? And finally, how can we ensure the long-term health of science and technology in the United States? Now, that's an overwhelming set of questions to consider. And I'd like to hear a little bit more from you about these 5 topics. So let's start with what can be learned from the pandemic. What is Pcast doing in that area?
Yeah. So so first of all, we were thrilled to get that letter from the president outlining his priorities. The president cares a lot about science. Actually, when he was vice president, Eric Lander was one of the external co-chairs of Pcast at that time, and he talked about the fact that the vice president would sometimes come to Pcast meetings and was scheduled to be there for a half hour and would just stay because he was enjoying the discussions so much. And so really thrilled to have a president who really cares about science and has laid out his vision for what he wants us to do. And the other thing that I'll mention before we start talking about the pandemic is, we got that letter right at the time that we were appointed. And so, our first job as co-chairs was to sift through the many hundreds of nominations for Pcast members. So there were nominations, there were self-nominations, and of course the president makes the final decision, but we helped go through the many nominations and the president chose a group of members who had the expertise to address those particular questions there. So the first one, what have we learned from the pandemic and what can help us? So we are not playing, we write reports. So we are not involved in the operational decisions associated with the current pandemic. I mean, Eric is in his role as presidential science advisor, but that's not a role for Pcast. So our point of view is forward looking, and so if you want to know what Pcast is thinking about and working on, when we hold meetings, and these meetings are all public, we are required to talk publicly about the things that we're working on. So while the details may be things that we can't talk about publicly, the fact that we're working in certain areas has to be publicly made known. And so we're focusing more on the idea of future health challenges, and I wouldn't limit it to pandemics. I think when you have something as game-changing as a pandemic, it brings to light a lot of things in our systems that really could be working better than they are. So just looking at being able to acquire PPE in the future, the idea of public health records, the idea of exchanging information that the government might have with the many public health organizations, and then the data that people have in, all the public health organizations in their cities and towns and states. What can we do better to bring that data to a central clearinghouse so that it can be assessed in the best possible way? So again, anything that we do here, we need to get information. Things. What gets reported in the press. There's always details on the inside that explain why things are the way they are and why they're not working better. You all know that. That's not an excuse. That's just to say that not all the information that there is about something is out in the public. So we're in the process now of just collecting up information and really looking at what Pcast could do in this space that maybe other parts of the government couldn't do so easily. What is the sweet spot for us in trying to make things work better? But that's the way we're thinking about it. Our last meeting, or at a meeting that we held last fall, we had, we brought in experts from state and local health areas and former FDA, former CDC officials to talk to us about that. We also, brought in some industry partners who were associated with the development of vaccines, in terms of what worked great, what couldn't you do that you wished you could do? How could we shorten even more the time for vaccine development? So these are all things that we're thinking about and looking at.
Well, I would say that's a topic that could consume all of your efforts if it weren't for the fact that the president had 4 other questions. And so climate change clearly is one of the critical issues of our time. And how do you see the role of Pcast in addressing climate change issues?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting and important question, and one that all of us, I think, are critically interested in, and I'm sure all of the people watching as well, because this is affecting our present and our future and our certainly our children and grandchildren's futures as well. And actually, if you think about, this administration has attracted just immense talent to the administration to work on this. And so, John Kerry is negotiating the international agreements, and Gene McCarthy is working on the agenda in the country right now. DOE is involved, NOAA is involved, and at Pcast we're looking. This is something that we're looking at broadly in terms of what data is available. What data are we collecting? What data should we be collecting? What assets are in place to collect climate data? So we're looking at satellite data. What does the government collect? What does the private sector collect? We're thinking about both measurement and monitoring. At the Glasgow, at the COP26 conference last fall, nations made commitments, for example, limits on deforestation and a very aggressive 30% reduction in methane over 2020 values. And so we make commitments on that, but are we actually delivering on those commitments? And so we're thinking a lot about, well, what sensors do we need to resolve methane and other greenhouse gases? Are they in place? What else needs to be done to bring that data together and to be transparent about what the emissions are? How closely can we, we want to know the value for the whole world. We want to know the value for our country to make sure that we're meeting our goals. But we'd also love to be able to resolve point sources to see where these emissions are. And, in the event that encouragement needs to be made about upping our game and reducing those emissions. So that's part of what we're thinking about. We're thinking about adaptation from the standpoint of climate risk. We also had presentations about this at a meeting in the fall. Insurers are, asking questions about risk. Investors are asking questions about risk. We have, we learned at one of our Pcast meetings that we actually, in this country, have a pretty good way of assessing earthquake risk. We know that earthquakes happen on faults. You people that live near faults so we don't know when the earthquakes are going to happen, but we have some knowledge, of over decades, where the earthquakes are going to be and what the intensity threat is. But we don't have a similarly well-evolved risk understanding for flooding and climate-related risks. And so more needs to be done in that areas. And in that, I would include wildfires as well. And we're just seeing more and more examples of that. So we're thinking about, and we've got tremendous expertise on Pcast in many of these areas. And then the third thing I'll say is just the state of climate modeling and what needs to be done in climate modeling, and then also on much shorter timescales, extreme weather modeling. There's room for improvements there as well.
So the third question that the president posed is, how can the U.S. lead the world in the development of new technologies and industries? And I think that's a particularly important question because Pcast has both science and technology in its name and in its function.
Yes, no, absolutely. So, we have, we also had a Pcast meeting where we looked at the idea of U.S. competitiveness, and actually there's so much going on in this space that I imagine that a number of reports are going to come out on this. But in terms of staying a world leader in technologies and industries, of course, looking at risks from foreign countries that are investing heavily in science and technology is part of it. This gets into the idea of transparency in reporting foreign collaborations and activities, and I think we'll probably talk a little bit more about that in this, and assessing our cyber risk. That certainly is going to be required as well, and of course, the whole idea of how can we ensure that the U.S. is a world leader in technology. We've got to invest in technology, and as well, we can't do it only by disclosures and transparencies and managing collaborations. We actually have to invest as well.
And I think it's important for everyone to understand that the investment you're talking about isn't just on the part of the government. It has to be a much more broad source of investment, including the private sector.
Well,
So,
yeah, also, and if I could just add to that,
sure.
just, you know, what can the government do to facilitate interactions between, you know, federal agencies, industry, and academia and nonprofits as well. So, you know, and how do we bring them together in ways that make sense? Looking at the conflict of interest rules, the intellectual property rules, you know, we should be doing this in a way that facilitates those kind of collaborations while still, you know, protecting people's ideas.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the next question is a little bit different from the others, and it's how can we guarantee that the fruits of science and innovation will benefit all Americans? That seems to strike a somewhat different note from the other questions that have been asked thus far.
Yeah, it really does, but it's a fantastic question, and it, you know, there are technical things that we could do. For example, making sure that all communities in America have access to broadband. That's certainly one important way. We know during the pandemic, places that had access to broadband, you know, were able to, you know, people were able to do remote work a lot easier in such areas. And you know, hopefully we're going to come out of this pandemic sooner rather than later, but remote work in some form is not going to go away. And, you know, this is, you know, this really bears on questions of competitiveness in areas that haven't had economic opportunities. So that will be part of the solution. So that's important. But then there are broader questions as well. And this is one where our social science colleagues really can play an important role. Do we have the right workforce? And does this workforce have the skills that we need? It's not all PhDs. You know, we need, there are a lot of jobs wanting in this country that require people with what I like to call STEM awareness. So they don't have a science degree or they don't have an engineering degree, but they need to know how to operate a complex piece of equipment or run software. So they need certain kinds of training. And, you know, what are the opportunities to acquire that training? You know, is it a community college? Should universities be offering you know, remote courses on that? Should industry be teaching its own courses on that and partnering with universities or community colleges? So, so this is just a great question, you know, in terms of getting the workforce that we need to, you know, take steps forward. And then, you know, of course, equity and merit are critically important here. And how do we make sure that that everyone in this country has access to education and has access to STEM opportunities? And so we're also thinking about, like, the federal workforce. Do we have the federal workforce that we need? Should there be changes in the federal workforce? You know, so we're trying to look at that. And you know, there are job descriptions that say if it requires a college degree to get a certain job within the federal government, couldn't we say, or equivalent experience, that would open up to individuals and give us a bigger pool to draw on? So these are the kinds of things that we're thinking about.
You know, my major as a graduate student was higher education. And so in those days, nearly 60 years ago, the feeling seemed to be that the only way that a person could get ahead in this country was to get a college degree and then go on and get more degrees. And it's clear, as you've pointed out, that that isn't necessarily the case, and that there are many jobs out there that can be performed very effectively that don't require a college degree, but that do require some specialized training. And where is that training going to be coming from, and who's going to be doing it? And I think I think what you said is absolutely on target, and something that we all need to think about in terms of broadening our understanding of what education really is all about. So let me get to the fifth question, which is, how can we ensure the long-term health of science and technology in this country?
Yeah, so that, another fantastic question from the president. Well, it's, for there, we are thinking about, should we be doing a deep dive into particular industries? Okay, so such as, the chip shortage that we saw has us thinking about microelectronics. More than 90% of the highest level chips are built in Taiwan, which is right off the coast of China, and China has aspirations with respect to Taiwan that whether or not anything happens there or when it happens, there's risk involved in being dependent on international sources for things that we need, like chips, like rare earth elements that we need in manufacturing, and a whole variety of other things. So looking at industries and supply chains, these, and then we've got the U.S. Innovation and Competitiveness Act, which is now in Congress, and I think stands a really good chance of passing, that would provide the biggest plus up in non-life sciences research, I think in our careers. And so the question of implementing that and making sure that if the Congress deems that this investment be made, that we do our part to make sure that funding gets spent well. So, there'll be the new directorate in NSF that I know you're going to talk about in another session that was mentioned earlier, but then also manufacturing institutes, and making sure that they operate the best way that they can. So there's an awful lot to do in this space.
Yes, I agree completely. I had, as you know, a list of other topics that would probably carry us through till about 4:30 or 5 this afternoon, but that would be completely unfair and unreasonable. So let me kind of pick one that I think is particularly relevant at this time. And the topic is foreign collaborations. And foreign collaborations seems to be a topic that has been on our near the top of our list of concerns for at least the last few years. And so from the point of view of Pcast, what are some of the principles and practices that need to be strengthened with regard to foreign collaborations?
Yeah, so that I think for many of us, we're spending a significant amount of our time trying to figure that out, and so if we think about principles and practices, so so transparency is one. Okay, we need to disclose what our foreign relationships are, and actually the revision of NSPM 33 that's came out very recently, which I think the implementation plan is frankly pretty excellent, and I expect there's a lot of people here who had input into that, and thank them for that. I think that's going to be particularly helpful. But an equal part of that is that we have to make sure that we don't lose what got us where we are, and we're at the top of the heap with respect to international science and technology, because we are the destination of choice for international talent who have expertise and interest in that area. And so what I loved about the revision of NSPM 33 is that it made not a guidance, but a requirement that the implementation be non-discriminatory. And so I think we need to find a way to declare and disclose while still being collaborative. I think another principle in international collaborations that's really crucial is reciprocity. Okay, when we enter in a collaboration, the entity that we're entering the collaboration for should benefit, and we should also benefit, and we should also make sure that we're open and publishing as well. But I think looking at reciprocity is actually pretty critical. So
one of the areas that you and I talked about in preparing for this session today is the role of Pcast with regard to national and economic security matters, which is very much related to what you were just saying. What are some of the things that Pcast is trying to do in this area with regard to safeguarding science, open research, that sort of thing?
yeah, well, I suppose that we'll have something to say about cyber in particular, since that's a risk. I'll note that that specifically because of this very issue, there's a fair number, I would say a larger fraction of Pcast members than there has been in the past with I'll say national security awareness or experience. And so, with regard to collaborations, the foreign collaborations. So when, if you're at a university and you saw the guidance from NSPM 33 come out at the end of the last administration, there were reactions among some of the recommendations that they were burdensome and difficult to implement and expensive. And quite frankly, when you talk to our colleagues in the intelligence community and in national security and law enforcement, they are not really sympathetic to hearing feedback like that. So, because there are actual problems, and but those actual problems are not necessarily known to a lot of researchers in either industry or the academy. And what Pcast has is a lot of folks who are read in. We're we're able to look at some of these recommendations and say, we actually know what some of these problems are. And some of these recommendations actually address these problems, and some of these recommendations actually would not cause this problem to go away. So how can we adjust the guidance to actually achieve what is intended to occur by offering the guidance? And that's where we've had some role.
Well, one of the aspects within this larger topic of national and economic security matters has to do with what's been, I think the term is controlled unclassified information, or CUI. I've always found that to be a very frustrating topic, and but I'd be interested to know what your views, as well as the views of Pcast thus far, are with regard to how can we best deal with something like controlled unclassified information. You know, it makes me long for the good old days when something was either classified or it wasn't. And if it was classified, then everybody understood what the rules are. But if it isn't classified and yet it's controlled and it's important to protect, how do we deal with that?
Yeah, so I actually can't give you Pcast's viewpoint on that because we haven't discussed it.
Okay.
But I can give you my perspective on that as vice president for research at MIT. And
we always thought of MIT during my 25 years at Caltech. We always thought of you as the other Institute of Technology, and so we're always interested in your perspectives.
Okay, well, thanks for that. So I actually agree with what you said. So, you know, on our campus, all research is open, okay? And if it needs to be classified, then it goes to Lincoln Laboratory, which is a part of MIT, but it is an FFRDC, and they do classified work out there. People need to have security clearances. People need to be US citizens. So the controlled unclassified information is actually very problematic for universities. Some universities are not like ours, and they allow classified work on campus. But with the CUI, there are different definitions of it and different requirements for how to use it. So safeguarding information, it's confusing to people. So I once had, for example, a federal agency actually who wanted to put a clause in an agreement where there would be controlled unclassified information, and we were required to safeguard it, but they weren't required to actually market that it was controlled unclassified. And we had to divine, or somehow, that something was unclassified and potentially safeguard something that wasn't even marked. And so I had to turn down that agreement. So that's an extreme case, and I hope it was a mistake and it'll never happen again. But it exemplifies the fact that that we're seeing things in terms of the agreements that we're getting from the federal government on CUI that is requiring a lot more effort on our end on how to deal with it. We think if it's okay, it should be open and it should be publishable. If it's problematic, classify it and put it behind the curtain. So.
Well, I agree completely, and I wanted to relate just a similar experience from the West Coast Institute of Technology. and that is agreements in which there's a clear requirement to protect controlled unclassified information. But it was always my understanding that there is a burden on the sponsor, the government, to tell us what is the controlled unclassified information that we're supposed to protect. And we, in a number of cases, we had extremely frustrating interactions with the government contracting officers who didn't think it was their job to identify the controlled unclassified information. They felt, well, you know, you're the experts in this area. You need to know, you need to decide when you see something that falls within that category and then protect it. And that, I felt, put us in a really terrible position. So I think we're more or less on the same page with regard to CUI. So let me turn to one last topic, and then we'll give people a chance to ask some questions. So the role of Pcast, as you've explained it very well, by the way, it is to give advice to the president, and to give advice to the president in particular on things that he may have asked for, as well as things that you as a group think perhaps ought to be brought to his attention. So my question for you is, what kind of advice would you, not on behalf of Pcast, but you as a leader in research and research administration, what advice would you have for the federal demonstration partnership in terms of the ways in which you think we can be more effective in our efforts to improve the research enterprise?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. You know, I think the present is at your doorstep, and that is the NSPM 33 implementation has come out, and Eric has sent it back to federal agencies to for 120 days to actually come up with the forms and processes. And that document calls for making requirements from federal agencies in terms of reporting and what's being asked for uniform to the extent possible, or to the extent practicable. Okay, and I actually talked to Eric on Friday, and what he said is to the extent practicable means that if you don't make something uniform, it's because it can't be done. Okay, not that it's inconvenient or burdensome or we've never done it that way, but that it's near impossible to do. So, and I know that it's going to take a lot of work to do that. But to the extent, you know, my dream out of this is that, you know, when you put together the framework for submitting a proposal, that it almost shouldn't matter what agency you're submitting it to. You know, grants.gov was designed to help do that, and it fell a little bit short of succeeding in that regard. So here we've got another chance at it, and a science advisor who's really committed to implementing this uniformity. You know, I think part of it is you know, this idea of digital CV and digital identifying that I know the FDP is thinking about. I love the idea of this. So put everything in one place so that you only have one document that you have to put everything into. And then you, the PI, will be personally responsible for making sure that what's in there is correct and accurate. So that it will help the agencies ultimately. It will help the universities, and it will actually help the investigators. So, so pedal to the metal on NSPM 33 implementation.
Well, thank you. That's very good advice, and we will do our best to follow it. I'd like to turn things over to Michelle and Alex for some questions that have come up.
Thank you so much. That was an absolutely fascinating conversation, and I'm sure our members are really interested in all that you brought to us in terms of insights, Maria. The first question is coming from Carmen Schultz, and she says, the biggest problem that young faculty encounter these days is the lack of funding, and because of that, many were denied tenure. How will this situation be addressed and improved?
Okay, yeah. So I'm hoping that the Innovation and Competitiveness Act that I mentioned before will provide some help in that regard. You know, that's, you know, on the funding side, that is for the new directorate in NSF, which is fundamental research in terms of national priority issues. However, that there are some things that are funded now by it. So it's fundamental research. It's not just tech. It's not tech development. It's basic research. But some of that work actually is going on now in NSF. And so the fact that there's going to be a new directorate actually that focuses on that actually raises the possibility that funds within the other NSF directorates actually can be freed up to provide more funding in other areas. So that's one way of addressing the problem. There's also funding in this that will be going to DOE as well, and you know, but that doesn't help everybody, but that at least does put more funding into the basic research ecosystem. So.
Thank you. I think Alex has a next question. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. We received a question from the audience asking, do you interpret the NSPM 33 guidance requirement that agencies implement policies in a non-discriminatory manner to mean that they cannot create policies that restrict citizens from specific foreign countries from working on certain projects?
Let's see. I think I'm not the right person to be commenting on that. But what I will say is that if it's open fundamental research, then it should be then anybody who is an accepted member of an organization in the US who can apply for funding ought to be available to work on that, unless there is absolute evidence to the contrary that's problematic. And but someone should not be restricted from a project simply because of race, gender, or country of origin, per se.
And Dr. Zuber, to expand on that, you and Dick were talking about CUI and the problems that we're all facing in trying to deal with CUI when conducting fundamental research on academic campuses. And so one thing that struck me was in the charge, the president asked, how can we strengthen and expand the connections between academia, industry, and government, which have historically been crucial for advancing technology and protecting national security. And I think the CUI example where they lost the benefit of your expertise, you had to walk away from a contract. And this isn't just a one case. This is, you know, something that happens quite frequently. And I'm wondering if Pcast can think of a way that will help address that, because clearly it's a challenge. Clearly it's needed to have these interactions and collaborations and connections, but there is a struggle and it's a challenge. And I'm sure industry says the same thing with working with research institutions.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, generally, Pcast is thinking about US competitiveness, and that's a part of it. If I could just speak again as Vice President for Research from MIT, MIT will not accept a grant that violates our non-discrimination policy. So we're seeing more and more grants that want to put restrictions on who can work on it, and we've been turning those down. And they tend to be in technology areas where I really worry that MIT is not going to be training the next generation of talent that we need in this country to address it, because we can't put the US citizens on that either. And so I think that we really need to work towards solving this problem. And it's our it's our point of view, and I'm sure the rest of you folks in academia feel this way, that when we accept a student and they're given a visa by the government, that individual has been vetted, and if they're not okay, please don't give them a visa, because we care a lot about national security, and we obviously don't want to be facilitating foreign influences that would be risky to the United States. But we have to think about the risk of being unwelcoming to the talent that was bashing down our doorstep to want to be here, and then most of those folks stay. So we've and I can tell you that on all of our campuses, our students particularly of Asian origin are really feeling very highly stressed and concerned, and we need to think about what's the bigger threat, and how do we actually solve the problem in order to continue to excel in the way that we have.
I think that's true of our faculty as well, sadly. That's certainly been one of the reactions. I have a question from Susie Allard. Has Pcast identified a mechanism for maintaining the scientific cyber infrastructure for the long-term sustainability of data created as a national good, perhaps through government funding? There is a challenge in keeping data safe long-term when funding tends to be just for the duration of the project. What do you think the role for government is?
Yeah, so great question. Pcast hasn't taken that one on yet, although we probably will take something on in the cyber area as we move ahead. And the NSPM 33 does have some cyber guidance, which I think is actually great. But if you read that, it's going to be difficult for some universities to be able to maintain the cyber level that's going to be necessary if that level of cybersecurity is going to be required to get federal grants. So that's the trade-off there. So I think universities that do a lot of DoD research or other very high-tech research, are going to wind up having to come up to NIST standards, and so that's a good place to be. Although we've had a lot of conversations that when you say that you're going to bring your university or your organization to a certain CMMC level or to NIST level, you're basically transmitting to adversaries what they need to do to break in. So, but it will make it a lot harder.
Sorry, I put myself on mute and then I forget. Okay, so the next question for our audience is, will there be a retraining plan to familiarize personnel at the federal agencies with the uniformity requirements? For example, same system, same materials, same processes. For example, some agencies seem to circumvent grants.gov and other like systems to accept and process grants via email. So it sort of goes along with your your discussion on, from a personal standpoint, of grants.gov fell a little short. And any insight on that?
No, so OSTP is really going to be responsible for this, not Pcast. We don't have any operational responsibility, but I believe that agencies are going to be required to show that they're complying, and I don't know how that's going to be implemented. I'm sure there's people watching who are thinking really hard about this.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Michelle.
Well,
I was just going to ask from an FD standpoint.
You
go
first.
Okay. We do this all the time.
We do.
Yeah.
All right, Alex, ask your question.
Alex, go ahead.
Okay, so from an FDP standpoint, I hear this a lot. There's another question. How can we address the stress on the academic research labs and promote models for federal research support? And I can give an example of years ago, FDP had a discussion regarding general project support or lab support versus faculty having to submit constantly, 2-year, 3-year awards with, not great success rates. So a lot of pressure on them for seeking out funding, dropping success rates, and then no full assurance that their labs are going to be supported over the long term.
Yeah, well, that's a long-standing question. So first of all, let's go back to that question about young researchers getting started in their career. Maybe we should give every person starting a new staff job or a tenure track faculty position, a block of funding to get them started. At the top universities, people do get some startup funds, which can at least get them started, but that's not uniform everywhere. And if everybody had the ability to get a starter grant, I know there are many of the agencies have programs that really focus on junior investigators. I think those are great. I think there should be another one after folks get tenure so they can retool and get a new piece of equipment and move in a new direction. But clearly, lengthening the amount of time of a grant from 3 years to 5 years would reduce that stress somewhat, for sure. The agencies want to know that that researchers are being productive. So there you have to balance, the reducing stress versus, assuring that we're using federal funds in the very best way. I know the NSF has done a number of experiments from my NSB days where instead of writing a full proposal that gets rejected, that researchers can put in just a short preliminary proposal and then get asked to then write a full proposal, which would give some feedback and also give them some feedback about where they need to improve and save them the time of putting together a full proposal. So there are some actually really good strategies out there for doing that. We're never going to eliminate the stress factor in a lab completely, unfortunately, because we are in a competitive environment. And actually, the let's be clear, and the reason that we're all in the US merit review system is the envy of the world, that we don't just hand out a little to everybody, that we, ask our researchers to compete, to put the best ideas forward. And it's really been a hallmark of US competitive success.
Thank you for that insight. And I agree with you completely about the need. You mentioned that the future of work will not be as tethered to academic preparation as we in higher education might like to think. That being the case, what is the role that you envision for institutions of higher learning? And what role can we play in preparing the nation's workforce for the future? And how should we be reimagining what our function is with respect to that trend line?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Yeah, I mean, with the growth of MOOCs and little mini degrees, you can go online and you can take a course anywhere. So, so at universities, we're going to have to offer a good product. I mean, if somebody wants to take introductory data science, they now have a lot of options about where they can take it. So it's going to be necessary for all of us to look at our offerings, and not just dust off our notes of what we've been teaching for the last 10 years. And so I think the pandemic has accelerated the move here. One thing that's going to be interesting is, I talked about the fact that people need a certain amount of training, but they may not need a whole degree. Some universities may want to get into the business of offering these components and not being a full degree. Some won't. A university has to think about its particular mission. But ultimately, the question is, does an individual see value? I mean, if a third party comes up and just says, Joe's Data Science Institute, and they make the best course there is, if a person who takes it knows a lot about data science, then Joe's Data Science Institute is going to become a real option. And so, with our universities and our semester system, and we don't teach our courses over the summer. This whole system, I think, is going to be questioned, and we're going to need to evolve with it, because lifelong learning is in. We're no longer in a system where you can just get your degree and then you're done. We're all going to be learning new things for our whole careers, and our institutions are going to have to evolve to deal with that. It's actually a great opportunity.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just to kind of follow up on that, it strikes me that one of the things that research universities in particular have to offer that is unique are the facilities and the opportunity to connect with the research enterprise that might not be available through some of these other alternative pathways to getting information. Can you offer us any sort of ray of promise or hope as to how we might build on that aspect of what institutions of higher ed have to offer to the nation's young learners?
Oh yeah, fantastic question. We're actually at MIT, we're thinking a lot about that, because students can take an online course, and then for those students who want to take it to the next level, there could be an in-person immersion that would do the part that requires in-person collaboration and hands-on learning at a particular place. And so what, universities, our products are education and research. Okay, that's what we do. So, by allowing some of what happens to be remote and then bringing students together, we'll be able to train more individuals that need training. I mean, all of our universities only accept a fraction of the applicants who are capable of doing the work that we offer. And this would really open it up and make it more possible. And in the best of circumstances, it would make it more cost effective too, because there would be more throughput in the process. So it would be less expensive, hopefully, to implement with larger scale.
I think we have time perhaps for one more question, and then we'll bring things to a close. Michelle, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I was gonna, you read my mind.
Oh, okay.
Well done.
So, Alex, any other questions that you would like to raise? You're on mute, by the way.
No, I think I've asked a lot of questions of Dr.
Okay.
Zuber, so thank you.
Okay, Michelle?
I would press you with one last follow-up thought related to this theme, which I think is of interest to all of us, because we're all thinking hard about, how are our universities going to respond to the changing, dynamics around us, to a post-COVID world of hybrid learning and education, and what role does the research enterprise play in having, in bringing some, I guess, organizing principle to all of that. And this question is, that, we in the research world are used to collaborating around research projects. We're not necessarily, as I think, as institutions, as used to collaborating around providing instruction and sort of opening up the idea that we all find so commonplace in our research world of working across boundaries with other institutions. I wonder if you could share your thoughts about whether you think that's something we might anticipate in the future, and what we might do as a community of researchers to help advance some good ideas and along those lines. Or maybe it's a bad idea, I don't know. I'm just curious about your thoughts.
No, I mean, collaboration is a great idea. And actually the very question here and the issue of collaboration at the pandemic, I can't give enough credit to the federal agencies at how quickly they came forward and offered maximum flexibility in the execution of work. And not only that, but I had heads of programs and even heads of agencies calling me up and saying, is there anything else we could be doing to help you through this that we're not doing? What are you hearing from your researchers in terms of what would help? And so major shout out to our federal colleagues who took this idea of, this is a collaboration, we all have to work together to get through this. And so the answer to your question is yes, I think we should be thinking this way about our institutions. And there's an example of the federal agencies working with the universities in really trying circumstances and demonstrating that this collaborative spirit really took the day and got us through this. It wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but we've all come out the other end, and we're ready to get on with it.
Well, Maria, I'm really glad you made that observation about the federal agencies, because it is typically the case that some of us spend a lot of time complaining about the federal agencies and about, oh, if they could only do this, or if they could only do that, or if they could only get off our backs and stop asking us to fill out more forms. But you're absolutely right. When the crisis hit, the agencies were very, very quick to respond, to offer flexibilities, as you say. My hope would be that they will discover that some of these flexibilities are worth keeping, and that we don't necessarily have to go back to the way things were previously because the flexibilities allowed universities to demonstrate that they could act in more flexible ways and still maintain the safeguarding of public funds and the public trust. So, Maria, I want to thank you very, very much for your willingness to spend this much time with us in what I, at least from my perspective, was a very, very profitable and enjoyable discussion that gave us an opportunity to learn quite a bit more about Pcast and its role. And you know, I want to thank Franklin Roosevelt for the Fireside Chat idea. He may not have been thinking about us. I'm sure he wasn't, but I think the informal discussion that we had today was really outstanding. And I want to thank you for your willingness to sort of subject yourself to this approach. I hope it was not too painful and that you saved some grief in not having to come up with a bunch of PowerPoint slides. So on behalf of all of us at the Federal Demonstration Partnership, thank you very, very much. It was a pleasure to get to know you a little better, to increase my respect for the other Institute of Technology, and we hope to have you join us again to give us a further update on the progress that Pcast is making. So with that, I also want to thank Alex and Michelle for the questions and answers. And David Wright, unless you have something to add, I think we can stand adjourned.